Okay, let's get into the breakdown of stage 11 of the Tour de France. The stage was pretty short. It was about 60 miles, 108 kilometers, very little flat, pretty much a continuous climbing and descending. There was a flat bit before the first climb, and then there was a flat bit before the last climb. Otherwise, it was pretty much either climbing and then descending. So, in the stage, the first climb was a horse category, second climb was a horse category, then there was a little category two, and that actually was going to a high elevation, but it's because after that second horse category, there was just a small drop before then climbing again, so just a category two, then a long descent, and then the final climb was a category one. To give you an idea, the stage began at about 1,400 feet elevation. The beginning of the first climb was about, let's say, a little over 2,000 feet. So they were actually climbing from the beginning. So they started at about 1,400 feet elevation. Then the horse category went up to about 5,600 feet. Then there was a descent back down to about 2,000 feet elevation. The second horse category was a climb up to about 5,700 feet. Then the short descent before the climb up to the category two, which that third peak then topped out at about 6,400 feet elevation. Then the descent down to about 2,600 feet before the final climb up to about 6,000 feet. So you can get an idea of the amount of elevation they were gaining. That first horse category was about a 7-mile length climb. The second horse category was about a 6-mile long climb. The third climb up that category two to that third peak at 6,400 feet or so, that was about a 2.5 mile climb. And then the last climb was a good long one. It was about 10 miles, of which the middle section hit about 9-10% grade. So that was the steepest portion of the last climb. Looking back on stage 10 and kind of the aftermath, so TJ Van Garderen, he did not do well on Sunday's stage 9 on the cobbles. He crashed. So to give him a little credit, he lost a lot of time, but maybe that crash messed him up. But I think he looked okay today. So I'd say whatever damage was done to him in the crash, it's not that significant. It was more he just had a bad day on the cobbles. But somebody like Balka Malama, who's also lost time in stage 10, looking into stage 11, he hurt himself in stage 9. He jacked his back up. Again, not to the point where he can't ride and where he can't make it through these stages, but let's say it is affecting his performance. The first climb up that horse category, Warren Barguil was out there on front, as well as Julian Alaphilippe. And Julian Alaphilippe won. So he's still looking good for the King of the Mountain. The second horse category climb, however, Alaphilippe began to fade. Warren Barguil was the first over the second horse category climb. Warren Barguil was also first over the third climb. So he's actually looking good for the King of the Mountain. If he continues to ride like this on the front of the stage and can get over the first couple category 1 or horse category climbs, and if Julian Alaphilippe continues, let's say, to ride well at the beginning of the stage but then fades, where Warren can continue to ride strong and be first or second over the second or third peak, this could flip where Warren Barguil could take the King of the Mountain polka dot jersey. I believe Alaphilippe still barely has the polka dot jersey, but Warren Barguil has to be right behind him, just a few points down, to get an idea. So again, there's the kind of breakaway that gets out in front of the peloton. That was Julian Alaphilippe. That was Warren Barguil. People like Thomas de Gent, Daniel Caruso, and Tarame, the Estonian who rode really well on the front yesterday, they were part of the group of about 10 or 12, 15 riders that were out 3, 4, 5 minutes in front of the main peloton group of the GC contenders. Craddock, the American who broke his scapula on stage 1, he's still hanging in there. he's actually doing okay. Movistar is number one in the team category. They jumped past Team Quickstep. Team Quickstep is way down around 6th or 7th or 8th. They have to protect their sprinter, Gaviria, so they have to fall back to help him get over these mountains. Movistar jumped up into first place in the team category. It's based on the times of the first 3 riders from each team. And because Mikel Landa, Valverde, and Quintana, among others in their team, are decent at the end of these early mountain stages, it helped to boost them. Where some of the other teams like BMC or Sky, although they have 1 or 2 riders near the finish, their third rider probably is finishing 8:10, 5:10, 8:15 minutes back, that sort of thing. So that's dragging their overall team classification down. Look for Sky, though, to begin to assert their dominance because they are doing a ton of pacing on the front of that core peloton of the GC contenders. So look for Sky to start to assert that dominance where they will get 3 riders over the finish right there. But look for Movistar probably to hang. So it's probably going to go back and forth between Movistar and Sky unless another team looks stronger in the mountains for 1 and 2 in the team category. So Sky pretty much was pacing the main core of the peloton, keeping that breakaway within 4, 5, 6 minutes, not really panicking, but not really pushing a hard pace. When they went up the second horse category climb, Movistar made an attack. Movistar got 2 or 3 riders out on the front of the peloton and started to push the pace. This then started to pull back any of the riders out in the breakaway. Then, as they got towards the end of the second horse category, before that small descent up to the category 2, going up over the third mountain, Valverde jumped out from the core peloton and did a solo attack. He then rode up to a teammate, Soler, who helped to pace him. And what was interesting is Valverde never really did the work. He paced behind. He was in the slipstream of his teammate, Soler, all the way until the last climb. And then Soler finally hit the wall and completely faded, and then Valverde had to ride on his own. Here's the catch. Valverde then linked up with Tom Dumoulin, who had jumped out and had gotten up to the breakaway group in front of Valverde. So eventually Valverde and Tom Dumoulin were riding together on that last climb, and Dumoulin was looking to Valverde to help give him some support, and Valverde was shaking his head saying no. So the question is, was Valverde able to do work and he just didn't want to because he wanted to save his own legs or be selfish? Or was he already beginning to fade and he was desperate that if he helped Dumoulin, he would not even be able to compete to have a good time at the end of this stage? Well, considering that on the last climb there, Dumoulin eventually dropped Valverde, and Valverde dropped back with the core peloton and then even lost time on that core peloton. I think it's more Valverde knew in his heart or in his body, in his mind, he was fading, and so he just was trying to survive at that point. But to give Movistar credit, for those who are critical, hey, at least Movistar, they made a move. They didn't wait to the last mountain stage. They actually did it on that second horse category. Valverde actually got about a minute and a half in front of Froome and Geraint Thomas and Nibali and Dan Martin and Quintana. They had it set up pretty well where his teammate from Movistar, Soler, was there. Soler did his thing to pace Valverde all the way until the last climb, and then Valverde just didn't have the legs and couldn't pull it off. And meanwhile, Dumoulin, who was out there in front, who then had partnered up with Valverde, he was strong enough. He just continued and stayed in front almost until the end. Some bad news for riders that have already lost time. So Balka Mollema off the back of that core peloton on the last climb. Rigoberto Urán already way off the back even before the last climb. Like at the end of the second horse category going into that category 2 to go over the third hill, and then the descent before the last hill, Rigoberto was already fading. So he's way off. He's going to have to be more like a TJ now and hope that he can get his legs, hope he can get an opportunity to maybe get in a breakaway in the Pyrenees or something like that to try to win a stage for his team. Okay, so the way to picture it then, you got, so going over that third mountain, the category 2, the one that went up and topped out at around 6,400 feet, you got Valverde out in front, you have his teammate Soler out in front, you have Tom Dumoulin out in front, and then you have the remnants of the breakaway and folks, the riders like Warren Barguil out there. Now, you have to imagine on these descents, they're hitting 90 kilometers an hour. So to get an idea, they're hitting 50 plus miles per hour on these descents. Everybody pretty much did okay, but you could see those who were hesitant and fearful, they were pulling back. But it didn't really affect that core group of the GC contenders. So going into that last climb, the category 1, so they're going from about 2,600 feet up to 6,085 feet or so in 10 miles. And so you have Valverde fading. So he's going from 30 seconds to 15 seconds to right back into that core peloton. And then eventually he's cracking and he's falling out and he's losing time. You have Tom Dumoulin, who's still in front, but he's losing his advantage. So where he jumped out from Valverde, and he's 30, 40 seconds in front of that core group of the peloton on this last climb, he's fading back. But he's at least maintaining as they climb up, he's keeping at least 15, 20, 25 seconds in front of them. And he's trying to catch the riders on the front to see if Tom Dumoulin can win the stage. So what's happening is the group, this core group, is getting smaller and smaller until eventually it's down to just the core. You have Geraint Thomas, you have Chris Froome, you have Tom Dumoulin, who's just a little bit out in front. Nibali's in there, Roglic is in there. Roglic's teammate, don't know how to pronounce his name, but it's like Kruijswijk. Then you have Mikel Landa, Romain Bardet, Dan Martin, and Nairo Quintana. So the folks who are going to fade out of that, so you have Valverde, he's fading and dropping out. Mikel Landa is fading and dropping out. Otherwise, that core is still there. It was all settled then in the last 5 or 6 kilometers of the race. So you've got Nieve out in front, hoping he can hold on and win the stage. A little bit behind him are the remnants of the last of the breakaway. But then of the GC contenders, you still have Tom Dumoulin out in front of the main GC group, not too far behind Nieve, hoping he can catch Nieve and even jump him and then get the stage win. So, meanwhile, there's little attacks going on between that core GC group that's about 15, 20 seconds behind of Geraint Thomas, Chris Froome, Tom Dumoulin, Nibali, Roglic, Kruijswijk, and Romain Bardet, Dan Martin, and Quintana. And by this point, Mikel Landa has already faded. Folks like Fuglsang have faded. Bob Jungels have faded. And Adam Yates have faded. So the losers in stage 11 who've lost even more time, Valverde down, Mikel Landa down, Jakob Fuglsang down, Bob Jungels down, Adam Yates down, Bauke Mollema down, Zakarin down, and Rigoberto Urán down. And to give credit, Mikel Landa and Fuglsang and even Adam Yates were there in that core until about that last 5 or 6 kilometers. For sure, the last 6 or 7 miles, they were there. So you can kind of see, I can see this is why they make the stages the way they make them, because if this stage were a little bit shorter, the strongest riders like Froome and Geraint Thomas or Dan Martin would win, but the time gaps would be much smaller. And the let's say, I don't want to say weaker riders, but the riders that are just not quite fit enough to actually finish on the podium, but are strong enough to be top 10 or 11, they would still be there. But by having those earlier mountains to soften everybody up, and then this last climb of this 10 miles, that was finally enough to break all but the strongest riders. So in that last 5 or 6 miles, you have Adam Yates cracking, you have Folksong cracking, and you have Youngles cracking. With about 5 kilometers to go, the core are attacking each other. Quintana, Bardet, Nibali not so much. Nibali seems to be playing it really conservative. Either he's not feeling very strong, or he's trying to save his legs for tomorrow in Alpe d'Huez, or he's hoping to make moves in the Pyrenees, and right now he's saving himself. But the riders like Dan Martin and Bardet a little bit and Quintana a little bit are being more aggressive. So they try to put some pressure on Froome and Geraint Thomas, and every time, of course, Geraint Thomas or Froome would close it down. And then finally, after that went on for about a kilometer, Geraint Thomas kicked it in gear and he rode off. And he even rode off from Froome. But I don't think it was any kind of competition or bad attitude or infighting. It's more that Geraint Thomas is seeing if he can go for the stage win. Geraint Thomas is seeing if he can get himself in yellow. And then meanwhile, Froome will mark everybody else in that GC core group peloton and or make a jump over and then be right there with his teammate Thomas. And that's pretty much what happened. So Geraint Thomas, he jumped and he eventually caught up to Tom Dumoulin. And then he was riding with Dumoulin, and then he dropped Dumoulin. And here's what's sad. So this poor Nieve guy, this Nieve is the remnant of the breakaway. He's going for the stage win. He's a few seconds ahead of Geraint Thomas, but there's still 400, 500, 600 meters to go. With about 200, 250, 300 meters to go to the finish, here comes Geraint Thomas. Geraint Thomas has dropped Dumoulin, and then here he rides up to Nieve and then blows by Nieve and then gets the win. So Geraint Thomas wins the stage. Geraint Thomas is in yellow, and poor bastard Nieve was so close, but not close enough. Okay, meanwhile, Chris Froome, about 30 seconds or a minute after Geraint Thomas took off, then Chris Froome took off, and he pretty much dropped Nibali and Quintana and all those guys. So in the meantime, Dan Martin was also riding aggressively. And so Dan Martin and Froome were kind of doing their thing in front of the other riders. And then Froome dropped Dan Martin. I got to give Dan Martin credit. Dan Martin was aggressive in the Wall of Brittany stage. Dan Martin has been aggressive in the mountains. Dan Martin is doing his damnedest. Unfortunately, once again, though, Team Sky and Chris Froome and Geraint Thomas just look to be too strong. And Geraint Thomas already had experience because he rode this exact last climb in the Dauphiné. So he already knew about it from the Dauphiné. He already rode well in it, so he knew exactly what to expect and what to mentally plan for. Gaps coming in. So you have Geraint Thomas in yellow. He won the stage. Plus 20 seconds came Froome and Dumoulin. What was cool is Dumoulin almost caught up to Geraint Thomas. Couldn't quite make it happen, but at least he came in with Froome. Dan Martin was only 7 seconds after that. So even though Dan Martin got dropped by Froome, he was able to minimize the loss. Okay, so Geraint Thomas wins the stage. 20 seconds later is Froome and Dumoulin. 7 seconds after that, so 27 seconds down to the winner is Dan Martin. Now to the winner, we got about 59 seconds was Bardet, Quintana, Nibali, and Roglic. So actually Roglic, as kind of an unknown, but he's done well in previous tours. He's right there. Maybe he can get himself on the podium. A few seconds after that, so about a minute 6 down to Geraint Thomas, was Roglic's teammate, Kruijswijk, or however you pronounce his name. Then at a minute 45 down, Mikael Landa, a minute 55 down Zakarin, 3:31 down Valverde. So when he cracked, he really cracked bad. 3:31 down Valverde. And then 3:50 down Fuglsang. Overall GC, Geraint Thomas in yellow. Second place, Chris Froome, a minute 25 down. Third place, Tom Dumoulin, a minute 44 down. Fourth place, Nibali, 2:14 down on the yellow. Roglic, 2:23. Kruijswijk, 2:40. Mikael Landa, 2:56. Bardet, 2:58. Quintana, 3:16. And Dan Martin at 3:16 as well. Really, it's not looking good for anybody other than maybe Dumoulin, who's at a minute 44. Maybe, well, somebody like Dan Martin, if he can stay strong, he should probably move up. But you can kind of see all Geraint Thomas and Chris Froome have to start to do now is mark their competition and or gain even more time on them in Alpe d'Huez, and then just ride a good, solid top 5, even top 10 finish in the time trial. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult for these other folks to catch up to them. But you can see how it's starting to shake out. One quick overall comment. It was nice that today's stage was shorter because right from the get-go, there was more aggressive riding. There was more action happening. As noted, they were either climbing or descending, so there wasn't a lot of dead space. And really, I can see how the tour organizers are smarter for doing this, because other than those 2 flat stages on 7 and 8, where really nothing happened into the last 10 or 15 kilometers, these shorter stages are allowing for riders to know that they don't have to just ride at a slower pace to save things for the end. They can start to become aggressive right from the beginning. On the flip side, here's what is annoying to me about the sport. And I have to say that it's kind of how all sports have some kind of a flaw. Football, soccer, you can end up in the tie and then lose on PKs. Football, you can lose a game just because of a BS call by the refs, because on any given play they can call holding or something ticky-tacky that can completely change the momentum or the outcome of a game. Basketball, players travel and or they don't really play at 100% until it's the playoffs or until it's the last 4 or 5 minutes of a game. Every sport has some kind of a weird aspect to it where it can be corrupted or it's boring or it can be too easily manipulated by a bad call or affected by a bad call. What do I kind of mean by that, or what kind of bothers me? Well, with the Tour de France, you're never going to win it unless you're one of these guys in the mountains who can just ride like a frickin' mountain goat or whatever. I mean, whatever. You have the lung capacity and the heart rate and the ability to oxygenate your blood or have the ability to withstand pain or to process ATP in your cells, your cells within your muscles, a little bit better than your competition. Because, I mean, really, what makes Chris Froome special? Nothing other than the fact that he was blessed or gifted with the ability to just ride and ride and ride. Same thing with Geraint Thomas. And, hey, God bless Dan Martin. The guy goes on the attack. The guy is trying his damnedest, and even he is 3:16 down, but in the stage, he was 7 seconds behind Froome and Dumoulin and 27 seconds down to the winner. And same thing, Tom Dumoulin. Tom Dumoulin was out there. Tom Dumoulin dropped Valverde, but he was not strong enough to hold off Geraint Thomas, and then even Froome caught him from behind. And just a little insight how these guys can close the gap. So in yesterday's stage, at one point, Julian Alaphilippe was ahead of that core group by about 5 minutes and 30 seconds. And at the end of yesterday's stage, they only came in about 3.5 minutes behind him. So in that last 20 kilometers or so of yesterday's stage, Chris Froome and that core group, they made up 2 minutes on Alaphilippe. So you can see that when they want to, they can crack and break any kind of a breakaway unless that breakaway rides their ass off. And so even then, like today, Nieve got caught with 200, 300 meters to go to the finish. It's sort of sucky, and this is what I was saying before, that we almost need to celebrate the losers more than we celebrate the winners, because in this tour, there's really only 5 or 6 riders that legitimately have a shot for the podium, and then there's another 5 that maybe can make the podium depending on how well they ride or what kind of bad luck hits some of their competition. So there's a lot of fodder. There's a lot of nobodies, and they're not really nobodies, but meaning they really have no place. They're not going to win a stage. They're not going to win GC or be even top 5 or top 10 in GC. They're not strong enough to sprint, and yet they without them the tour would be nothing. The tour would just be 6 sprinters and 6 or 7 climbers, and that's it. And then they would just duke it out. Now, here's what I kind of wish. In some ways, I wish the tour was more about just winning stages. In other words, get rid of the yellow, because the way Julian Alaphilippe rode yesterday was exciting. The way Dan Martin has gone on the attack was exciting. Even the way Valverde tried and went on the attack today was exciting. The way Warren Barguil is trying to get the King of the Mountain is exciting, even if he's fading with 5 or 6 or 7 miles to go. It's this like an ocean wave knocking down a cliff. This whole idea of the strongest team and then the yellow jersey, and then they just eke out 20 seconds or a minute a day until they get a 2 or 3 minute buffer, and then they just protect it. And meanwhile, nobody can attack them by the 3rd week in the tour because everybody's exhausted. So even if somebody tries, they're just as tired as Froome or Geraint Thomas or whoever's in 3rd or 4th. So at best, maybe you can move from 7th place to 6th place. But then the very next day, you might drop back to 7th or 8th place if you've overextended yourself. So really, other than the sprints, by the 3rd week, everybody's done. Even the breakaways at that point have very little energy to really go for it. I don't know. I kind of wished the Tour de France get rid of the yellow jersey and just make it about winning each stage, because then even somebody like Chris Froome would go balls out earlier in a stage. Or it wouldn't just be about this whole thing where Sky sets a killer pace to wear everybody down until it's that last core of 8 or 10 or 15 riders, and then in the last 3, 4, 5 kilometers, they just ride away from everybody. It's frustrating. And it's kind of stupid in a way, because now there's no more mystery. It's just seeing who's basically going to get 3rd or 4th or 5th place at this point, and then who might win an individual stage, because they do like what Alaphilippe did, and they just kind of catch magic and a little bit of luck. Okay, Alpe d'Huez tomorrow, and let's see what kind of time gaps come out of that.